Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Diverse Educators World Book Day 2022 celebration event, where tonight myself, Hannah Wilson, has been joined by 10 of our diverse educators who are published authors. So in part one, I'm delighted to be joined by Amy, Anoara, Jess, Kulvarn and Ray. And each of our authors is going to share a little bit of their story as to why they wrote their book, what they wrote about, what was the kind of the motivation and purpose of writing the book, and more importantly, how do they even go about getting published? That's the question that comes up a lot. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to hand over to Amy to share her story first.
Hi everyone, my name's Amy Sayer. This is my book, which is called Supporting Staff Mental Health in Your School. I was working in a secondary school. I'm a trained secondary school teacher, and I was the mental health lead for my school. And during the training courses that I was doing with some wonderful colleagues, it became apparent that there was lots going on for school staff in terms of their mental health, but there wasn't always a way for them to talk about how they were feeling, to access support that they might need. And so I kind of did lots of research based around this, because I thought it was really interesting that, you know, schools spend a lot of time thinking about how to support the mental health needs of their pupils, but actually a lot of the time there isn't as much consideration for staff mental health. So when I was kind of doing reading around the topic, obviously there were lots of fantastic wellbeing books already out there, and so I contacted people that had written them, like Dr. Emma Kell and Dr. Pookie Knight-Smith, to kind of just see their perspective on things, to see if I could write about something different, because I was writing lots of different staff mental health kind of policies for my school and for other schools within my academy chain. And it just occurred to me that actually it was quite an isolating event, because there weren't many people I could network with, and there wasn't much out there for me to have a look at. So I started to write some things down and collate some ideas. And I thought it might be kind of worth writing about in terms of a book style sort of thing. So I contacted some people, and I contacted Pookie via Twitter to ask who her publisher was. And she sent me the link, and I sent them a proposal. And it kind of went from there, really. And what I've really enjoyed writing about it is the opportunities it has led to today, really. Lots of the work that I do is mental health training in schools and for charities. And that has all come about through, you know, that initial conversation with Pookie on Twitter, talking about the fact that I wanted to write this book and I thought it was worth being out there. And I think, you know, lots of the training I do today, it's a real privilege to hear kind of people's stories about how they struggle with their own mental health and education. But to kind of give a bit of a message of hope, really, that schools really can support staff in the same way that they do with pupils. And it's just about knowing what they can say and what they can do. And actually that, you know, that's just down to educating people. So it's about kind of creating a culture where it is okay to talk about mental health when you're a member of staff. And it's about making sure that there are systems that give you the right support when you need it, because we all know how tricky education is at the moment, and it's been exacerbated by COVID. And so it's really, really important that schools have a clear system that's really consistent, that is available for all members of staff, so they feel kind of less alone and less maybe ashamed of what's going on for them. So that's my 3 minutes. That's my story. Thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. And I'm jotting down some notes and some questions to see the threads that come up between all five of you. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Anoara to share her story of being published.
Hello. So here is my book, Think Metacognition Powered Primary Teaching. And I initially thought about writing the book back in around about 2016-17, because at the time, the buzzword in education was the word metacognition. And I was absolutely fascinated by the word, didn't have a clue about what it meant. And I thought, I need to explore this a little bit further. And when the EEF document came out, I started going through it with a fine-tooth comb and realized, oh, actually, it is something that we all teachers, we all do in our classrooms. But I guess the most important thing about it is maybe we're not always as explicit as we could be when teaching it. So that's how the journey started. And there were a few books on metacognition, not written by anyone like me. And they were really great. They had lots of wonderful strategies, but I really wanted to get my teeth into the research side of things. So I wanted to incorporate research in a little bit more depth, because I was really, having become actually an assistant head teacher for the first time, I was aware of looking more closely at the school context before implementing something. And I thought it would be useful to write a book incorporating the research, case studies, having some strategies in the book, and having reflective questions so that teachers could see where they are in their metacognitive teaching, and teaching of it more explicitly. So those are the reasons why I wrote the book. Also, what I tried to do with the book, and I hope that this does come across, I've tried to incorporate a little bit of narrative. And because metacognition is also about connections, not only about thinking, but making connections, I have made some connections in the book. And those of you who have read the book will see I'll say, please see chapter so-and-so for extra information. So hopefully that comes across. In terms of finding a publisher, I remember approaching a couple of publishers quite early on, and I didn't hear anything back. But at that time, it was just an initial idea. And then I got really involved with Women Ed. Whoa, go Women Ed. Big shout out to Women Ed. And when I went to the London conference, the International Women's Day in 2019, there was a huge book launch of the 10% Braver book. And actually, one of the editors was there from Sage, and he was delivering a talk about how to publish a book. So I thought, oh, I'll go along to that. And I did. And I went over and introduced myself really cheekily. I was like, hello, I'm Anoara. And we'd had a couple of email exchanges prior to that. And then they guided me through writing the book proposal. So yes, so that's how the book came to be.
Thank you for the shout out for Women Ed. I love that networking opportunity. Strike whilst the iron's hot. There's a publisher in the room. Let's go and talk to them. I love that, Anoara. Thank you. Let me pass the mic over to Jess. And Jess, you better tell everyone where you are, what time it is, your part of the world as well before you start.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Jess Gosling. I'm in Taipei right now. So it's 2:07 a.m. So that shows my dedication to be up. This is my book here, Becoming a Successful International Teacher. A little bit about my background to explain it, I think. I'm not from a family that had anything to do with education. And to be honest, it was kind of something that was rejected as I was growing up. It was working class family. I was considered I should go straight into work at 16. But I didn't. And I decided on a convoluted route to become a teacher. And then I absolutely loved traveling. And it was kind of in the background that I would try to be international. But I did. And it was quite a scary first experience. I didn't know what I was doing. I was completely green. I was, I think, 28 and traveling out to Egypt for my first placement, which probably wasn't the easiest of placement. And I did lots and lots of things wrong. I still had a fabulous time, so I still converted myself to being an international teacher. But my decision to write a book was really to try and give a space for everything I experienced and to really support other people on that journey too. Because personally, for me, for my career, it's been the best journey I've ever had. I'm more than 10 years now. I'm moving into my 4th international school this year, and I'd highly recommend it. But I really thought I'd like a guide from a teacher's perspective, because there isn't anything like that around. And I also was very, very lucky because, of course, on the way, I've made lots of friends. So throughout the book as well, I'll show you a few little segments. I've got my own little narrative. Ooh, trying to line up. That's my little narrative in there. So I talk a bit about my story. But throughout the book as well, I've got quotes from friends, colleagues, recruiters as well. So it ended up being a bit of a research project more than a book. And I guess maybe like lots and lots of people, I started off and it was very small and it was a blog on my website. And then it just grew and grew. And then the perfectionist teacher jumped in. So it had to be perfect. So it ended up taking 10 months to write and to get all this information. In terms of publishing, I didn't have a publisher. I had an editor who was absolutely fabulous. And where I was putting down lots of ideas, she just managed to put them all together for me and make sure the book reads really, really well. So I tried one publisher, and I was, they said they loved the idea, which is obviously really exciting, but they had somebody else in the works doing the same thing. So I felt even more under pressure then to get it out. So I self-published myself last summer through Amazon originally, and now I've gone through Ingram Sparks as well. So it's in bookstores as well. And I can say that was actually really, really easy to do, which sounds surprising. The formatting of the book, I got support. I outsourced that, of course, but the actual publishing the book and going live, that wasn't particularly difficult to self-publish. So I really recommend people, if you have a book in you, to go ahead and self-publish, because it is possible. A quick run through what's in the book. So it's about finding the right school for you, incredibly important when you're abroad. Also, where in the world to work, looking at the application progress, making a great CV, philosophy of education, a lot about interviews and salary questions, how to prepare before you leave, because I think that's sometimes missed off, such as personal preparations, what to expect when you arrive, how to go about getting great housing, settling in and thriving, and then I include voices of international teachers and their dependents. So there's a whole chapter on that as well. So there's quite a lot of considerations, especially if you've got a trailing spouse or you're a teacher parent, etc.
Brilliant, thank you, Jess, and well done for self-publishing, because that can feel quite scary in itself. But thank you for emphasising how easy it is to actually go about doing that. And a number of our authors last year had self-published as well, so thank you for sharing that. Let me swing over to Kulvarn. Kulvarn, welcome. Over to you to share your story, please.
Hi, thanks, Hannah. I'm just enjoying listening to everyone else, to be fair. I can actually pick up on some of the things that everybody else has said, because it's very similar for me. Just going back to what Jess said, is I never saw myself as a writer. I didn't think I was a writer. I probably saw myself as more of a mathematician, to be fair, but I always enjoyed reading and I enjoyed writing. I just wasn't inspired to do it. And similarly to what Jess said, is I'm only second generation literate in my family. So I live with my grandfather, who was illiterate, very intelligent man, but he would take me to the library, all of us siblings, to the library every 3 weeks, regular on clockwork, and we picked 7 books. So he inspired me, even though I had to teach him how to write his name so that he could sign in the bank. How did I come to write a book? Never had a plan to write a book, to be fair. But what happened is, when I first started teaching, I really felt a strong sense of inequity in terms of what the quality of children's education. And I felt that we needed to create environments in our schools which were far more expansive and supported staff professional learning. So that's been a passion since I first started teaching. And moving forward, my doctorate focused on what are the factors that impact upon teacher engagement in professional learning activities. So that was 8 years whilst being a head teacher and deputy head teacher, having 3 young children, which people say, how could you do that? Well, there's not many opportunities to go out when you've got 3 young children, so you might as well do some studying at home or writing. It's true, anyone who's been there knows that. Your social life is just killed off. So once I did that doctorate, by the end of it, you've completely fallen out of love with this document, because academically, the fun is sucked out of it by the end, because you're writing for academia. And when I was having my Viva or Viva, whatever you want to describe it, for 2 hours, so nice to describe to someone what you're doing and what you've learned. And then at the end, she said, what are you going to do? And I said, you know what? I don't ever want to look at that again. I don't think anyone's going to want to read it. It's boring. But I want to take my learning and maybe put it in a book for other people to perhaps gain from that research. Because one of the things in the book is that I've drawn from workplace learning theories. And I think I'm probably still the only person who has drawn on workplace learning theories to consider how we can adapt the learning environment for teachers in schools. I still think I'm the only person who's done that. So then I thought, you know, I'll start writing the book, and it was pretty easy, because when you've got 60,000 words of research, trying to put that into a practical guide for teachers is far easier than writing the doctorate. And it was quite exciting to write. The publishing bit, I love the fact that you ask about getting published, is because I'm writing a book that nobody wants to publish. So I'm contacting publishers, and maybe this is what publishers do. Really good idea. And then the but came in, which was, oh, people aren't buying books anymore. Someone said that. Other one was, you've got no online profile. Nobody knows you. Well, I quite like the fact that nobody knows me. I'm quite a private person. And then one publisher decided to go with me. And I had this editor who was constantly sending me stuff, rewrite this, do it like this, passive voice, third person. It was becoming something that wasn't mine anymore. And then right at the point when she'd been spending months doing it, she goes, oh, we had a meeting and we've decided we're not going to publish it. But for anyone who's out there, is don't give up. Just keep going. If you think you've got something worth sharing, then don't stop. And I finally found John Catt. Oh, sorry, I haven't shared the book, The Thinking School. John Catt, who liked diverse thinking, diverse educators. And they said, yeah, I hardly had to do anything with them. I just shared the idea and they said they're up for it. Just a quick one. That book's been published and it's done quite well. Those other publishing companies that didn't want to touch me before have asked me if I would go with them to publish a second book. I have been working on a second book, but I'm incredibly busy at the moment with 2 schools. So it's slow progress. But I'm sticking with the publisher that was originally, you know, shown faith in publishing The Thinking School. So yeah, my message is, go for it. Don't give up. Writing is fun, it's enjoyable, and it's a great learning experience. So yeah, I'm really glad to be part of this, to hopefully inspire a few more people to join our group or be on it next year.
Fabulous, thank you. And yeah, absolutely, lay down the gauntlet. Like, who's going to get published in the next 12 months to come and join us next spring as well. I'm loving the diversity in the journeys, and we'll pick that up in a second. But let me hand over to our 5th and final speaker for part 1. Ray, over to you. You're on mic, you're on mute, babe. It's not very often that Ray's on mute, but she's on mute.
Classic error. I did that on purpose, obviously. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really lovely to hear everybody's stories, and it's just so exciting to have a World Book Day event that is for grown-ups. So having spent the day with lots of children dressed up in wonderful costumes, fairy princesses and Robin Hood and all sorts of lovely costumes, to spend the evening talking about books this evening is great. So my name is Ray Snape. I've been a head teacher for 15 years, and I had to ask my husband how many years it was since 1994, and he told me that that's 28. So I've been in education for 28 years, which, because I'm really good at sums, that means in 2 years' time, I'll have been teaching for 30 years. That's just ridiculous, because I'm still 28 years old. So I don't know how that's happened. For anybody who knows me, I am absolutely passionate about education. I say it's my passion, my profession, my obsession, and my hobby. And if I'm not at school, I'm thinking about school and just reading about schools. So one of the things that I've done more recently is to be a national leader of education. That's given me a great opportunity to go and work with other schools, and particularly in the area of trainee head teachers. So people thinking about being a head teacher, aspiring head teachers, deputy heads that are thinking about going on to be a head teacher. And it's the biggest privilege in the world. When I had one of my first head teachers, she said the job of a head teacher is to make other head teachers. And I'm hoping that I can encourage everybody that's a teacher to go on that journey, because it's a journey of perpetual discovery on a daily basis. As Anoara will know and Kulvarn will know, it's being in leadership is, and Hannah, you definitely know, it's just a joy all the time. So I was, I'd been invited to go and work with a group of head teachers in York. It was a Teaching School Alliance that had invited me to go and spend the day. And I'd been tweeting as I'd been doing activities with colleagues there and tweeting about how the day had been going. And then just as I was coming back on the train, sitting, feeling quite that I'd had a lovely time, because the Teaching School Alliance had very kindly paid for my accommodation and my dinner, and I'd met these really wonderful, enthusiastic deputy heads. And so I was just looking through my phone, looking over what had happened with the tweets I'd been sending. And in my DMs, somebody from Bloomsbury had said, "We really like the sorts of things you talk about. Would you be interested in writing a book?" And I was just blown away, because as Kulvarn said, you know, and everybody else is sort of saying, I didn't necessarily think of myself as a writer. But of course, we're writing all the time. If we've ever written a newsletter or a letter to parents, we are naturally writers. We're always honing this word instead of that word, choosing another way of putting things, perhaps being diplomatic or suiting our audience. So once I'd fallen off my chair and thought about it, I was really excited to start the process. And so I wrote the Head Teacher's Handbook, going that way, like that, which is a mixture of narrative, first-person narrative that I think everybody here is bringing to their books, their stories, their understanding of how they learning is reflected in their own profession, and also other voices who've joined me on the journey to talk about what it is to be a head teacher and how you start. And the aim of the handbook is that it takes somebody right from the initial part of interview and thinking about setting out their stall, the first 100 days, literally what do you do on your very first day as a head teacher? What do you do in your first month? What do you do in your first term? What do you consolidate in the following years? And throughout the book, there are useful, well, I hope they're useful, checklists and also points to reflect on. And so that it's a bit like emotionally hand-holding people. And then right at the end, there is something about well-being, because we really want people to sustain the journey and to love the journey. And picking up on Amy's words that she used right at the beginning is this message of hope. So for those of you who know me, I insisted that the flamingo of hope, this way, that's it, this side, the flamingo of hope, I really wanted the flamingo of hope to make it onto the cover. And that was also exciting, having the opportunity to influence what the cover would look like. So that message of hope that Amy talked about is what I hope that perhaps all of our books are about, is a message of hope for whether we want to travel the world, whether we want to be a thinking school, to be an amazing teacher, to have metacognition in our school, and looking after the well-being of our colleagues. Being a head teacher, I think perhaps everything that we say, perhaps the five of us, far be it for me to say, but looking at that idea of connecting with others, being about well-being, but really an important message of hope that education is a great thing and writing is a great thing, and perhaps everybody could do it and everybody should do it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ray. Thank you all five of you for sharing your narratives. And there's definitely lots of connections, isn't there, with the five perspectives we've heard there about this blend of practice and theory as well, and the kind of the humanising of the profession is what I'm really hearing. Because when I was doing my PGCE and some of my leadership courses, it was so theoretical. And actually, I wanted to learn about the people who were in the system and to understand how they had navigated it. And Anoara, you used a phrase like you hadn't read a book by someone like you before. Can we just talk about the importance of representation actually in educational thought leadership, because it's not really there, is it, Anoara?
No, I think we're still a long way from it. Sorry, can you hear me? Yes. So
I work out whether echo somewhere. I can't work out where it's coming, but don't worry, just carry on.
All right. Yes, I think we're at the beginning stages of it. And obviously events like this, I'm hoping will inspire others to follow suit. And as Ray said, we are actually all writers, because we do write things like newsletters. We write letters to parents all the time. Primary school teachers, we're modelling, and secondary school teachers, sorry. We're always modelling writing to our children. We're always thinking of, new stories to write, to inspire children. And if we can do that, then we can inspire adults as well. And when I say somebody like me, my parents came to this country in the 60s. They started working, but due to unforeseen circumstances, they ended up on benefits. And therefore, I was an EAL child. When I started school, I could not speak English. I could read my own language, but I couldn't read English. Also, I was a free school meal child as well. So if someone like me, if I can end up writing quite an academic book with lots and lots of research, anybody can do it. And that's what we would like to see more of.
Love that, Anoara. Thank you. Let me come to you, Kulvarn, because we are a female-heavy panel tonight, and as a couple of the authors have talked about, like, Women Ed has done a big push on women finding their voice and blogging. But you are a bit of a unicorn. There aren't very many men of colour in education who are also head teachers, who are also authors. Like, what kind of reception have you got from peers and colleagues out of interest?
Well, I'm actually a long-time friend of Vivian Porritt. Going back nearly 20 years. So I was inspired by her because she did some work with us in Newham. So I've known Vivian a long time. So I'm a big fan of Women Ed. In terms of what we've got to accept, it's more challenging for people who don't fit a certain criteria, which we can all relate to. But then there's also that responsibility. Someone once told me, you have a responsibility to be a head teacher, because you have to represent for others. And I was quite fine. I was coasting as a deputy. Or you have a responsibility to finish that doctorate, to inspire other people at the University of East London. So for me, it's been, I feel like I'm just constantly challenging myself. And I feel that I have a responsibility to show other people, for example, Asian men as primary school teachers, let alone head teachers, not much has changed in terms of, I don't think there are very many Asian primary head teachers, and also being brave and being yourself is the thing, because if you conform to somebody else's expectations, you're not being yourself. So even things like retaining your accent, and it sounds strange, but it shows that you're proud of where you come from. And I work with a lot of, I also happened to be free school meals as a child because of the recession in the 80s through no one else's fault. I'm also, English is not my first language. So I feel that I have that connection with a lot of children who are in a similar situation. So I think there's importance for people to take responsibility, because you open the door for so many other people.
Yeah, thank you, Kulvarn. And coming to you, Jess, like you talked about, like almost like finding that gap. Like there wasn't a book for you, and then when you found out that someone else was writing that book, like how did you go about even working out that you needed to write this book, that there was a kind of a gap in the market?
I think just because there was nothing for me when I first went out, and I had been checking subsequently after, and there was another book that was actually being published a similar time, like I said, but it was from quite academic background to the other people. So I thought really something that was more of a guide, and people didn't have to read for like, I don't know, read 20 chapters to find out what to do. I wanted to make it really, really direct. And that's what I achieved really with writing this. So I agree what other people are saying as well. It's some people have a real fear of writing, but we write all the time. And this did actually come after I started writing and publishing articles. And I think I just got confidence in myself by doing that and realizing, which doesn't happen in the teaching world enough, that people thought my writing was really good. So I got a lot of confidence through that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people start blogging first, don't they, to almost find their voice and find their kind of style as well. And Amy and Ray, I'll come to you first, Amy. Like, both of your books seem very like pertinent to what we've been going through in the last 2 years, because mental health and wellbeing has been such a focus, but also just the spotlight around heads and the attrition rate of heads as well. Amy, what sort of feedback have you had? Like, what kind of like traction have you had from the school system since you've published?
It's been really good because it's meant that I've been able to go into lots of schools and offer training to leadership teams so that they understand how to talk about mental health with their teams. Because when you look at all the statistics, it's really scary that, you know, more people than not in schools feel that they can't talk to someone about their mental health. And so that means that potentially you've got people that are feeling really alone and isolated, and actually the support they can be offered can be really life-changing, but also allow them to carry on teaching, because, you know, it can be the best job in the world, but it can't be if the mental health support isn't there during tricky times. And we know that COVID has created a greater need for mental health support in schools for teachers, just because of the amount of emotional things that we are having to hold as a result. You know, be it either personally, other colleagues that are struggling, but the children that we're trying to look after, you know, none of us have expected this sort of event to happen, and the potential for trauma to arise as a result of it has meant that lots of extra support might be needed.
Thank you, Amy. A final comment from you, Ray, about how can we actually make sure that the leadership courses in the country are looking at diverse authors rather than perhaps the traditional thought leaders, the white men who have the most followers on Twitter, etc.
Well, I think I just think that there are just some amazing leaders out there. Angela Brown's amazing. She's just so, you know, particularly around coaching. You know, if there are just so many great thought leaders, and I think it's really about following as many people as possible and really championing their work. And I think just being perhaps challenging yourself to make sure that when you're looking at who you're following, there is diversity, and I think that comes down to us as well, really.
Awesome. Can I say a massive thank you to part one, all 5 of you. Thank you for your time. Thanks for writing the books. Thank you for putting yourself out there. I know that feels quite sort of like nerve-wracking in itself. And the gauntlet's been laid down by Kulvarn. Let's see who's joining us next year for people in the network who publish their books in the next 12 months. So go enjoy your evenings. Put your books up. Give us a flash. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining me. And we'll be back in 1 minute with our other 5 speakers. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. And welcome back to our World Book Day event celebrating diverse ed authors. Thank you, our part 2 speakers who have been waiting in the wings for me to stop talking with our part 1 authors. It's lovely to have you all here. In part 2, I'm being joined by Meena, Nadia, Nikki, Serenas and Sean. Thank you very much for finding the time to join us tonight and to come and share your stories about the books that you published. Nadia, do you want to kick off first, please?
Sure. I always liked blogging, and when blogging about relationships. However, when I became a school leader and opened up Mount Hope Bridges Academy, I would always go to the bookstore and look for books that would feature women of color, that would feature stories about children and the challenges they were facing, what educators were facing, strategies to support them. And what I would find was more about books that focused on pedagogy, you know, teaching your content, dealing with struggling readers, or classroom management. But it really wasn't anything from the heart and soul of what education felt like in the classroom, or offered some type of hope and showed that there were children who, despite adversities that they were facing, could overcome those battles. And then also, like, when you're an educator and you're feeling down and out, where were the stories that were saying that despite everything you're going through, you can still be successful, right? But you have to define what success looks like. And so I started writing chapters to what would become a book, but hadn't really taken off and looked for publishers, hadn't looked for an agent. It just so happened that my story was featured in Humans of New York. And because of that, there were just a large number of agents who were interested in getting my story out, as well as publishing houses. So I did have the advantage, but it also was the challenge of actually being able to write the stories and figuring out which stories to share. It was published as a hard copy as well as a paperback. And I know that for a lot of educators out there, you have a story within you, you don't know where to start, and you try to look for a publisher. And I want to encourage folks that you don't have to get a large publishing company. You can also publish on your own. You can do it as a downloadable ebook. You can, gather your group of friends and share your story so that they can share your story as well. Because although I have a book through the publisher, I also created an ebook that is essentially a resource for helping teachers to develop, helping leaders to help to develop their teachers as well, and providing a lot of information and strategies that you wouldn't find in the book. So you can also control that for yourself, right? And have the opportunity of sharing what you started out as a book, but then extending it. So that was pretty much my journey. And in many conversations that I've had with educators who have been able to read the book, they've often read the book when they were ready to quit. And after reading it, they felt like I can still keep going. They found some way that the book connected with them, that they didn't feel alone in their own journeys. And so that has been gratifying.
I love that. I love the fact that the book has kept people in the profession, Nadia. So thank you very much for sharing your story. I've got lots of questions about representation and the US education market when I come back to you in a minute. Meena, can we see whether we can get you off for you to share your story next? There she is. Over to you, Meena.
Right. Well, thank you very much, finally, Hannah. Okay, I'd like to talk about my inspiration for secondary curriculum transformed, enabling all to achieve, and therein lies the inspiration for my book. So it stems from my experiences as a teacher and a principal in schools and in FE. I have experienced over the last, 20 odd years, possibly more, two types of curriculum. The first type of curriculum was vocational academic pathways with day release in FE settings for those children who needed to do some kind of engineering course, hairdressing, anything skills-based. I then, by 2013, experienced the EBAC curriculum as we have it today. And I'm firmly of the belief that that is a curriculum which is a conveyor belt and has resulted in winners and losers. I mean, by 16, 1/3 of children systematically failed through this curriculum. Now, I was an HMI for 13 years. I then became a principal, but in both cases, I was so demoralized and disheartened when I used to go into lessons and see children really disengaged from their learning, off task, behaviors off task, and then often excluded from lessons because they weren't focusing. Why weren't they focusing? So nobody would ask that question. The reason they weren't focusing is because those subjects were not subjects of their choosing. They were not relevant. They were not meaningful, and therefore these children were not being inspired by the curriculum they're following. So I was passionate, I really was. When I left being a principal in 2019, I was passionate that I wanted to write about this. I wanted to create a curriculum that really would enable all our children, our young people to achieve, regardless of their background, but from their starting points. So I wanted to look at assessment and curriculum, and to really dismantle the whole accountability measures system, but look at a curriculum that was essentially going to not just be knowledge-led, but was actually going to give our young people the skills that they need to be fully functioning in our society, to go on to higher education, to go on to employment, and basically to become global citizens. So what would that look like? It would be a curriculum that would inspire. It would ignite the curiosity for learning. It would actually make our young people critical thinkers, self-reflective learners, and leaders of their own learning. So I, armed with all of this passion, I wrote an outline for this book, and I invited my deputy head, Nick Haddon, to join me because he's a brilliant curriculum thinker. to write as well alongside me in the book certain chapters around adaptive curriculum pathways. We approached Routledge, and they were very keen on the idea, and the book started its journey in 2019. Interestingly, this was during 2 years of lockdown. So not only was it a book around curriculum, but it captured a historic moment in the narrative of education, because guess what? We then got hybrid learning, we got digital technologies on board, and I was, to be honest, I know it sounds a bit odd, but I was really excited because I was going into schools. I was really lucky. The first part before lockdown, I was able to go into schools, do curriculum reviews because I was commissioned to do so. And so I captured loads of case studies that are actually in the book, not only using digital technologies, but all sorts of ways of actually enabling children to achieve. And it was absolutely, I was privileged, I have to say. Finally, the book was published, and I was very fortunate that I had a fantastic launch sponsored through the Association of Education Advisors with absolutely wonderful speakers. I had Dame Alison Peacock, Tom Sherrington, and lots of others, Professor Colin Diamond on board. And I was just thrilled. But this all happened during lockdown, so that was quite interesting again. And it wasn't the launch I would have liked in person, it was on Zoom. Nevertheless, what's come about after this has been training workshops that I've been doing with schools and principals, not only in the UK, but in India, where I've had a long-standing network of schools that I've worked with, and in the last year, Dubai. So I'm still working with these schools, and it is on aspects of the book. And I guess it's my dream come true. But I will finish by saying, I just want to say something from one of the heads in the book, who is the principal of an alternative provision, okay, not mainstream. And he wrote a review for the book, and he said, "This is a must read for those who want to realign the curriculum to their vision and values." That's what I want to see, a values-led curriculum for our children. It captures a range of case studies, examples that are relevant and thought-provoking, designed to support leaders at all levels. And it's a reflective guide to help us improve the educational outcomes for all. Now, that coming from a principle of an alternative provision, to me, is the biggest compliment. And I worked with his school as well. It's the biggest compliment anyone could pay me.
Thank you, Meena. That's brilliant. Well done. And like lots of you wrote your books during lockdown, which is the double whammy, isn't it? The double challenge. So thank you, Meena. I'm going to swing the mic over to Nikki. Nikki, welcome. Can you please share your story about how your book was birthed?
Hi, funny you should say birth, because it kind of happened whilst I was on maternity leave. And I very much, I think during a lot of breastfeeding sessions, I started to think that all I was a bit of a glorified human cow, and that my brain had stopped working. And as much as my daughter looked at me adoringly, my brain was fizzing and fizzing and fizzing. And my friends were like, "What, so you wrote a book? That's not normal." But that's literally how it was birthed. And it kind of came from this frustration at so many of my friends, colleagues were getting really saddened and leaving the teaching career. And a lot of it was coming back to the same thing, which was behaviour, how it was handled, how senior leadership teams were taking it, the cultures. And there were such fantastic members of staff that I was watching kind of teaching hemorrhage these people. And yes, I wrote it in a pandemic as well. And I think teachers took a heavy battering during that pandemic. And I couldn't get my head around why we were, because when you're at the chalk face, when you're in that building, you know all the things that everyone goes through for a day. You know, for every teacher that I sat down on the toilet at 4:30 and going, "Oh my God, that's the first time I've gone to the toilet today." And all the things that have come from it. And I was like, this isn't okay. But then when I'm looking at behaviour books, sometimes the focus has been on the negative. And I'm not that type of person, hence why Feel Free to Smile came around, because every teacher has one of those stories that goes, "You'll never guess what happened to me today." And
usually when they come out, they share it maybe 5 years after it happens, because at the time they're so embarrassed about it. But the longer you've been in teaching, you go, yeah, I lost a kid on the subway system in New York, and they were going to the Bronx. True story, that was in the book. And now that would be a huge safeguarding concern, but it happened quite a while ago, so no one's coming after me. So I thought I'd commit it to print. But the genuine thing about this was, I really wanted those new teachers to kind of get a sense of, do you know what, it does go wrong, and that's okay. That's why people who contributed, I made a real point of getting trainee teachers, NQTs, and teachers that have been teaching for 10 years plus, because sometimes it feels a little bit like the highest paid person in the room is the one that has the best opinion, and that's not necessarily the case. Some of the best things I've learned have been from trainee teachers, and I kind of wanted to remind people that the wealth of knowledge isn't always from the one with 100,000 Twitter followers. And from me personally, I have it came from a place of, I would watch certain people on Twitter, their numbers grow, and day by day mine would go down one a day. Someone would unfollow me. Usually after maybe I'd pointed out something about, say after the Euros, I was like, yeah, those 3 black boys are going to get abused, and I'd lose followers. So when you write a book, which to be honest has nothing to do with race, but everything to do with being proud and say that I am a person, I can write these things. And the proudest chapter on that book for me, because they all they have titles that go, so you balls up the lesson today. But one of them is, so you think ladies can't behaviour manage? And it was a whole chapter where we spoke from a lady's point, from a woman's point of view, which doesn't actually always happen in behaviour management books. And the point that I kind of made was, my husband's 6'7", and by his demeanour alone, he might think that he can control a classroom, but actually his stature probably does 90% of the work for him. So it's about actually taking the narrative to people like me, and bring it to also people that aren't like me, to be able to listen and go, I never thought of how a woman might feel when a year 11 lad has come in stinking of links and football and doesn't want to sit down and learn. But it's all about laughing. And basically, to quickly wrap it up, I, on a whim, approached Bloomsbury, sent them a pitch, then found an editor who worked for Bloomsbury on LinkedIn and said, I've got an idea, can you chase it up on the inbox? And that was it. She really liked it. So yeah, that's my book.
Loving that. I'm loving that. I'm loving the DMs on LinkedIn with a smile, Nikki. I'm loving your start there, mate. Brilliant. Our next author is Serenas. And Serenas, you might have heard in part 1, there was lots of shout outs to Women Ed and Women Ed helping people find their voice and getting their books published. So it's fabulous to see you. Over to you, Serenas.
Thanks, Hannah. It's lovely to see you as well. So my journey into writing started off by writing articles for like Schools Week, TES, and other publications, and some journals that I've written for as well. And then gradually I moved into writing chapters in book. And you've already mentioned Women Ed. We both wrote a chapter for the first Women Ed book. But I also wrote chapters for a number of other publications that had approached me and asked me to write sections based on my specialism, which is really around closing the equity gap. And then I think it was 2017, we were at Festival of Education, and I had an email one day from Julia at Critical Publishing saying, would I like to write a book? And that really coincided with one of my dreams. I had for a while wanted to write a book, but I've never actually got around to writing it. And as Meena said, I've actually decided that we could put this proposal together, which was accepted. So I started writing the book, which is really based on what I've done over the last 30 years with schools and school leaders in particular, around closing the gap for lots of groups of pupils who I thought weren't getting a good deal from our education system. So my book really focuses on the needs of a diverse range of pupils that are increasingly in our classrooms. So I've got chapters on social class, which we know through the pupil premium is a really big issue. Focused on gender, as you would expect, based on our work in Women Ed. Pupils with English as an additional language, 1 in 5 pupils have English as an additional language and growing. minority ethnic pupils. A third of our pupil population is, made of diverse learners. Gypsy, Roma and travellers who get a really raw deal from our society generally, and education manifests that. Refugee and asylum seekers and special educational needs. And because of the work that I've done with leadership in particular, I know that was really critical. So I wrote a chapter on leadership. And basically, each one of those chapters, what they do is they talk about the research evidence, because again, based on my work in schools, I've found that very few people had had the opportunity to study that either through the initial teacher education or subsequently through CPD. So each chapter has a real focus on the research evidence, so it's grounded in that research. And then part 2 of each chapter has lots of strategies and practical suggestions, because I wanted colleagues to be able to read a chapter and do something about it immediately, rather than think, okay, this is the theoretical underpinnings, but what do I need to do? And it's also got lots of case studies in my book based on pupils that I've either taught or I've worked with in schools. So they're really, real pupils in our schools. And then, points for reflection. So there's quite a lot, I think, hopefully a mix of the theory as well as the practical to make a difference, because we still do have gaps with these pupils. So, unless we have quality CPD for teachers and staff in our schools, we're not going to make a difference. So that's what my book's about.
Brilliant. Thank you, Serenas. And I think Sean wins the prize for having the biggest copy of his book on screen. Sean, is that a copy of your book behind you? I love it. Over to you, Sean. Tell us about your book.
It covers up my untidy shelves, I hope. So there it is. There's the real one. Celebrating Difference, a whole school approach to LGBT plus inclusion. Good evening, everybody from London. I'm Sean Delenti. Thanks for having me here. I've worked since 1992 as a class teacher, as a school leader, as a school improvement consultant, as a school governor, so lots of different roles. But for the last 13 years, in addition to all of that, I've worked internationally and across the UK as an advocate for inclusive school communities and learning communities, particularly around LGBT plus. And back in 2009, I came out as gay to my whole school community as school leader, because we had a problem with homophobic bullying. And that was where I started to write, actually. Because of that, I was asked to write for the Huffington Post, for the Guardian, for the TES, and so on and so on. And that's really how I started to develop confidence in my own voice, which I'd completely lacked, I think, up to that point. And it enabled me to find out what I was like as a writer, which I think was pretty terrible at the start, looking back. But it was a wonderful platform to have all of those opportunities to develop my voice and my style. So to cut a long story short, in 2016, I think, Bloomsbury Education had been following me on Twitter, and they reached out and said, we've been following your work. We'd love to come and see you and meet you. We'd love you to write a book based on your work. Now, by my work, they meant the advocacy, the training, the talks to children, the work with initial teacher training and school leadership teams and school governors and parents and carers that I've been doing for around 13 years. So it was really a case of trying to capture that in a handbook, I suppose, in order to fill a vacuum that I think we all are familiar with, because at the age of 54 years old, I never had any education myself on LGBT plus inclusion. I never had anything on it at initial teacher training. And that still sadly seems to be the case for the majority of professionals that I work with. So it was very much about filling that vacuum, because that vacuum creates, as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, almost a sense that we haven't got permission to do this work, that something bad will happen when we do this work, when actually all this work is about kindness, dignity and respect, not for some children, but for all children. So I got writing, and Bloomsbury were very keen on me in the first section of the book to share my own lived experience, because I actually walked out of state education as a teenager, very, very nearly ended my own life actually as a result of homophobic bullying and prejudice. So they really wanted that story in there. And I think it's actually really important for all of us, and I know we all do, to share our voices, to share that lived experience, because it enables a sense of trust. It also, I think, helps us develop a sense of empathy in other people. And I wanted to sort of do that at the start of the book. Before going on to the toolkit section, so the rest of the book, after my lived experience, really is a refinement, I suppose, of the 6-tier process of personal, cultural, and organisational change that it's my privilege to work with primary schools, secondary schools, faith schools, state and independent, around the UK and around the world. And I really wanted it to be very reflective. I'm also a lifelong meditator, so I wanted to kind of build lots of opportunities for pausing and reflection within the text as well. When the book was published, it was recommended in the Houses of Parliament, to my great amazement. It was the top 10 Learning Ladders book in 2021. And writing it was a really positive experience. And I'm very grateful to everybody that has read it, that has bought it, that has fed back. But most of all, I'm grateful to everybody that shares it within their school, and shares it with colleagues working in schools, because really that's who I wrote it for.
Fabulous, thank you, Sean. And there's all of these independent book publishers who curate these diverse book boxes for children. I would love someone to curate a diverse book box for the staff, like a box that has 20, 30 books of diverse thought leaders. So let me come to you, Nadia, because the reason why we started this event last year was there's been a big spotlight on the lack of diversity in education and the workforce, but then it kind of surfaced the fact that there's such a lack of literature by diverse educators. Is it similar in the States? Is there a lack of representation?
There is. You go into the bookstore, you go into schools, you ask leaders, teachers, what are they reading? And a lot of the literature that's there is centered around white men, right? That's what you find oftentimes. And it doesn't represent our experiences. It doesn't represent diversity and inclusion. And it's very regimented. And the fact of the matter is, when I wrote my book, I was focused on my mantra, opening a school to close a prison, and what that requires for us to be able to do that. And so, to Nikki's point around how a lot of books are centered around disciplinary action, but at the heart of it is, where's the building of relationships? Where's the understanding of community? How do we make every child feel like they belong in a space? How do we hold adults accountable and develop them? And while we identify their biases, we need to understand that they come from a historical place, their homes, that makes them teach this way, but they also have a responsibility to children, right? So how do we create this space of learning without judgment? And so that didn't exist. What existed was, tell children to stand a certain way, tell children to sit a certain way. You have to be a cis male, like all of these things that I was just like, and this is how we destroy the love and nurturing environment that our schools deserve. And there's no examples to counter that. So that's why I stepped in and created the book.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nadia. And I'll come to you next, Nikki, because what you said, absolutely, like I think every behaviour, lecture, seminar, talk, book I've ever been to has been by a big white bloke in shorts normally who teaches PE. So you've really smashed the kind of the glass ceiling and the concrete ceiling here. Like, what sort of feedback have you had from a female heavy profession around being a woman writing this book?
I think, firstly, there was only one chapter about the ladies aspect, and there was almost like a collective sigh of, why has no one said this? Kind of like just that, little things that you might think you're having such an awful day because you can't control the class, but actually, and then someone will go, well, they'll behave well for me. And it's like, well, you're not taking into consideration things like, I've got 2 older brothers, and they would tell me of the teachers when I came to secondary school that I had to watch out for. There was one woman teacher that they told me about, and she had a husband who was also a teacher, and it was only, you've got to behave for this person or else you'll get this. And you forget about how a narrative can serve you well, but you may think that you're very good at something. And I think what's so important to I'd love the confidence of some of the people that have torn me down over the years, when you've really broken it down. It's like, well, I think you've had a lot going for you that I potentially didn't, but that's never held me back. I've become an assistant head. I've, you know, how exhausting it can be to code switch on the daily between your home life and your work life and still present and be strong and be, you know, you be passionate and I be aggressive, but I'm still telling you that I'm going to smile my way through and I'm going to pull up everyone with me. Because some people shut doors behind them because they can be gatekeepers, and that's okay, but that's not going to, and that's, if I could very quickly just say, Hannah, there's in my acknowledgements, I put this one sentence, if I could reach everyone, where I kind of said, to anyone who's been told you need to work twice as hard for half the rewards, keep plugging, keep banging down the doors to occupy the space, because you deserve to be there just as much as anyone. And that's all I want to.
I love that, Nikki. And I'm thinking about the kind of those who have been voiceless historically in the sector, in the workforce. But Sereena, if I come to you, like, your book really is giving voice, isn't it, to all of those groups of children who are marginalised by the system. The children who we don't talk about enough, and we don't pay attention. You talked about asylum seekers, EAL learners, children who are part of the Gypsy Traveller kind of community. That reach is quite wide. So what kind of feedback have you had from your book being published, Sereena?
It's been a mixture. Either it is really around equity and diversity and inclusion and what we can do, and it's been very promising in the sense that, you know, school leaders have really recognised, I think, with COVID, with George Floyd's situation, with obviously world events at the moment. You know, we had Afghanistan and now we've got Ukraine, and the whole thing about, you know, refugees being on our doorstep rather than somewhere over there. Obviously, refugees has been an issue for absolutely ages with Syria and so on. So there's actually, you know, two types of responses. One is around we need to equip and find out more, and that's something that I'd picked up, and I knew that there was a big vacuum, because teachers and leaders were saying to me, we just don't know much about this and we've never covered it. And we're actually teaching these pupils that are in our classes now. And I think, you know, world events really have brought things to the fore, that we can't just pretend that we are serving all our pupils in our classes. These children that I'm talking about, they're in everyone's classes. So whether they're in high numbers or small numbers, they're there. So it's about time the system reflected and changed to meet the needs of our pupils, rather than expecting pupils to fit in and say, this is what you're going to get, and, you know, whether it suits you or not. So I think, you know, it's been very timely. I didn't plan it that way, but I think it's been a catalyst for some of the most needed change that I've been banging on about for 30 years, really.
Your life work suddenly became very current, Sereena, isn't it? And it was timely that your book had been published. And I think that makes a link back over to Meena, and like Meena being a voice from the FE further education sector. Am I right in thinking, Meena, there's more students in FE than there are in all schools put together? I read a statistic somewhere about the number of children in FE, and there's not a lot of books, is there, from lecturers, educators? Unmute yourself, just share your thoughts about the further education voice.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is my second book. My first book was written in 1995 when I was not living, but working in FE, it was around, again, the same theme of access and progression for young people and for adults as well, coming to this country from overseas as professionals and wanting to be qualified. I mean, one of the themes I think for me, and is echoed by Sereena and Nikki and Nadia and Sean, is that sense of being the outsider. So I came to this country at the age of 10 as a refugee, and basically I had a lot of disrupted schooling in coming to this country. And then I was so unlucky, I ended up in a selective school system in Kent, where I failed 11 plus, surprise, surprise, and went to a secondary modern. So as a result of that, I could only take 4, in those days, O levels at the age of 16. And that was it, even though, you know, I was able to take more. So for me, that sense of being an outsider and being penalized because I was different and a refugee, etc., and all of that, flowed through. When I went into FE, I started off in schools teaching French, but then I went into FE, and basically what we received in FE were so many pupils or young people who'd been failed by school, and they came to us for that second chance. And that was what was so demoralizing, that we were giving them a second chance. I mean, a lot of them were so eager to leave school and come to us. And that has remained with me ever since, you know. So in fact, that has been a major influence for this book, because I think, as Serenas said, you know, I'm looking at pupil groups and I'm looking at why are we creating a square peg in a round hole syndrome for children, and why aren't we creating a curriculum that works for all? And strangely, other countries do. I will come on to that, because globally other countries have got brilliant systems, which I've talked about in the book. Why on earth can't we copy those systems or even borrow from them? You know,
thank you, Meena. I'm going to have to pause you because we've run over, and I want to get to one last question to Sean. But thank you.
I finished.
No, that's fine. We could talk about these books all night. So yeah, fantastic. Give it a pop. So let me come to you, Sean, because I mean, I know that one of the fears of putting yourself out there and talking, tweeting, writing, publishing is the kind of the critique and the kind of the negativity. Do you want to share any thoughts about how you braced yourself or how you had your resilience to navigate that? And did you get any negativity, or was it all affirmation when you got published?
I think I was so used to the negative stuff by then. I was just kind of like, bring it on, you know. And it's about where I choose to place my awareness. I can either kind of sit and fester in that space with all of that toxicity, or I can actually look at the feedback that I get from people working within the profession, or maybe a parent that's picked up the book and they're using it to talk about LGBT plus people in their own family, or an initial teacher training faculty that's picked up the book and now they've planned a unit of work for their whole cohort. You know, our brains very easily stick with the negative stuff, so it's about reframing your awareness, I think. But that said, there are times when I have to report things as, you know, hate speech. There have been times when I've had to speak to the police about threats, and there are times when I have to step back. And I'm a lot less kind of, I guess I'm a lot less interactive on social media than I used to be. I use it more as a broadcast platform now, to be honest, because I just don't believe that you can have nuanced, complex conversations in a tweet, and I just don't try anymore.
Thank you just for addressing that, because I know that's always a fear or an inhibitor at the back of people's minds. I just want to say a massive thank you to all 5 speakers from part 2 and all of our 5 speakers for part 1, and all 10 of you for putting yourselves out there and being published, because that can be a nerve-wracking process. But thank you for disrupting the dominant narrative. Thank you for representing, and let's see who gets published and who writes in the next 12 months and who pops up on our StreamYard celebration next March. So go and enjoy your evenings, but thank you very much for joining us tonight.